Katharina Sterling moved through the world as if she owned it, because in many ways, she did. Her reality was a curated sequence of polished glass, brushed steel, and the deferential silence of subordinates. Today, that reality was the back of her chauffeured sedan, a silent, air-conditioned capsule gliding through the city's chaotic arteries. On the tablet resting in her lap, numbers glowed. They were the only language she considered truly universal, the only truth she trusted. Her firm, Sterling Equity, had just concluded the acquisition of a legacy manufacturing conglomerate, a bloated beast with dozens of underperforming appendages. Her job was to trim the fat, to render the beast lean and profitable. Her thumb, tipped with a blood-red nail, flicked across the screen, dismissing entire divisions with a casual swipe. Factories in the Rust Belt, gone. A pension fund, restructured into oblivion. Then, she paused. A line item so small it was almost a rounding error, yet it irritated her with its persistence. Project Ethelred, a defunct R&D skunk works from a subsidiary the conglomerate had absorbed a decade ago. The asset was listed as a collection of scrap and obsolete prototypes stored in a derelict warehouse on the company's oldest, most neglected property. The carrying cost was negligible, but the land it sat on was suddenly desirable due to a new municipal development plan. She tapped the comms button. "Marcus," she said, her voice cutting through the car's engineered silence. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." The voice of her assistant, Marcus Thorne, was immediate and tinged with the permanent, low-grade anxiety of a man who served a demanding goddess. "Project Ethelred. The warehouse in Northwood. Liquidate it. I want the lot cleared and the property listed by the end of the quarter. Don't spend more than a day on it." "Understood," Marcus replied. "There are some notes here about specialized tooling and unique prototypes. The engineers who worked on it are long gone, but the file suggests." "The file suggests nothing, Marcus," Katharina interrupted, her tone sharp as broken glass. "It's junk. It's a line item with a negative value because it's occupying land I want to sell. Get rid of it. Offer it to a local scrapyard. If they won't take it, pay them to haul it away. I don't care how. Just make it disappear." "Yes, Mr. Sterling." The line went dead. Katharina Sterling leaned her head back against the cool leather. She had just orchestrated a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, and she was being bothered with scrap metal. The sheer inefficiency of it all was what truly offended her. She closed her eyes, the numbers on her tablet fading as she mentally moved on to the next, much larger, target. The fate of a few tons of old metal and forgotten dreams was beneath her notice, a speck of dust on the immaculate surface of her world. Some 30 miles away, in a world that might as well have been on another planet, Elias Vance was also focused on a piece of metal. It was a small, brass gear, no bigger than his thumbnail, from a vintage clock he was repairing for an elderly neighbor. He held it with a pair of tweezers under the bright, clean light of his workbench lamp. His garage was not a place of chaos and oil stains, it was a sanctuary of order. Tools hung on a pegboard in perfect, silhouetted rows. Manuals and schematics were filed in labeled binders. The concrete floor was sealed and swept clean enough to eat from. A tiny burr, almost invisible to the naked eye, had been causing the clock's escapement to catch every third rotation. Elias touched it with the tip of a jeweler's file, a single, precise stroke. He did not file it away, he merely displaced the material, burnishing it back into the surface of the gear. He examined it again under his magnifying visor. Perfect. The movement would be smooth now. There was a right way to do things, a patient way, and it was the only way he knew. "Daddy," a small voice asked. Elias lowered the visor and turned. His daughter, Lily, stood in the doorway connecting the garage to the small house. She was 7 years old, with her mother's serious eyes and his own quiet disposition. In her hands, she held a drawing, a colorful explosion of wax crayon. "What have you got there, Bug?" he asked, his voice softer than the one he used for his own thoughts. She walked over and presented the drawing. It was a picture of the two of them, standing beside a fantastical-looking car with 6 wheels and wings. "It's our new adventure car," she announced, her tone matter-of-fact. "It can fly, so we can go see the clouds." Elias studied the drawing with the same gravity he had given the brass gear. He pointed to a small, intricate series of lines near one of the wheels. "What's this part?" "That's the turbo encabulator," she said, using a nonsense word she had picked up from an old cartoon. It makes it go fast. Of course it does, Elias said, a rare, small smile touching his lips. You can't have a flying car without a turboencabulator. It's essential. He carefully took the drawing and pinned it to the corkboard above his workbench, a vibrant splash of color amidst the monochrome schematics and parts lists. It was his most important board. It held every drawing Lily had ever given him. His gaze lingered for a moment on a faded photograph tucked into the corner of the board, a woman with kind, smiling eyes, her arm around a younger, less weary version of himself. The reason for all of this. The reason for the quiet garage, the small house, the life he had built from the ashes of another. He turned back to Lily. Dinner time. She nodded solemnly. Macaroni and cheese. The best kind of dinner, he agreed. He carefully placed the repaired brass gear into a velvet-lined tray, switched off the workbench lamp, and took his daughter's hand. As they walked into the house, the immaculate, orderly garage behind them fell into silence, a temple of quiet competence waiting for a purpose. Elias Vance, a man who once designed entire propulsion systems for the most advanced vehicles in the world, was content to fix clocks and make macaroni and cheese. He had made a choice, a long time ago, to trade ambition for peace, to trade the world of Katharina Sterling for the world of Lily. He did not regret it. But the skills he possessed, the knowledge locked away behind his quiet eyes, did not simply vanish. They lay dormant, like a perfectly machined engine waiting for the right fuel and the right key. The name on the patent filings was E. Vance. There were 17 of them in total, all assigned to a company that no longer existed, Alistair Automotive. They were not for mundane things like cup holders or seatbelt tensioners. They were for things like variable intake geometry in naturally aspirated engines, for a unique metallurgical process for creating lightweight, high-strength connecting rods, for a transmission system that used magnetic rheological fluid to achieve seamless shifts. To the legal department at Sterling Equity, they were just historical data points, part of the digital debris of an acquired asset. To the handful of automotive engineers who remembered Alistair, they were scripture. Elias Vance had been the lead systems engineer at Alistair. It had been more than a job. Alistair was a boutique firm that built cars with soul, magnificent, temperamental machines that were as much art as engineering. They were a small team of brilliant, passionate misfits, and Elias had been their quiet center, the one who could translate the designer's wild fantasies into mechanical reality. He had a gift for seeing the entire system, from the molecular structure of the engine block's alloy to the feel of the shifter in the driver's hand. He was on a trajectory to become a legend in the industry. Then his wife, Elena, had gotten sick. The diagnosis was swift and brutal, a sudden storm that swept away all their plans. The high-powered career, the long hours, the obsessive focus on tenths of a second and grams of unsprung weight suddenly seemed absurd. He spent her last year by her side, learning a new kind of engineering, the mechanics of hospital beds, the tolerances of drug dosages, the complex system of a life winding down. After she was gone, he was left with a 2-year-old daughter who had her mother's eyes and a future he had to build alone. The choice had been simple, and therefore agonizing. He could not be the engineer Alistair needed and the father Lily deserved. The company understood, or at least they said they did. They offered him sabbaticals, part-time consultancy, anything to keep his brain on retainer. But Elias knew he could not do it halfway. His work demanded totality. So did his daughter. He chose his daughter. A few years later, without his unifying vision, Alistair Automotive faltered. It was acquired for its brand name by the same conglomerate Katharina Sterling would later buy, and its brilliant engineering team scattered to the winds. Elias packed up his life, moved to a quiet town, and opened a small shop where he could fix things, be home by 5 every day, and never miss a school play. He traded the roar of a V12 on a test track for the quiet hum of a well-ordered life. Only one person from his old life remained a constant presence, Ben Carter. Ben had been Alistair's in-house counsel, a sharp, pragmatic lawyer who saw the world in contracts and clauses but who understood, better than anyone, the value of what Elias and his team were creating. They had been friends since college, an unlikely pairing of a methodical engineer and a sharp-witted attorney. Now, Ben ran his own small practice, specializing in intellectual property and business law. They spoke once a week, a ritual that had persisted for years. It was during one of these calls that the first stone was cast, the one that would cause the ripples that would eventually become a tidal wave. You won't believe the chatter on the old Alistair forums, Ben said, his voice crackling over Elias's phone. Elias was in his garage, cleaning and oiling a set of torque wrenches. I don't read them anymore, Ben, Elias replied, wiping down a half-inch wrench with a clean cloth. I know. That's why I'm your designated reader. Sterling Equity, the private equity vultures who bought the conglomerate, are cleaning house. They're liquidating everything they consider non-essential. Remember Project Ethelred? Elias stopped wiping. He put the wrench down, its gentle click on the workbench the only sound in the garage. Project Ethelred. It was the last thing he had worked on. It was his masterpiece, the culmination of everything Alistair Automotive had stood for. A completely new engine, a 60-degree V12, designed from a blank sheet of paper. It was compact, impossibly lightweight, and theoretically capable of producing over 800 horsepower without forced induction. It was designed to be the heart of a new car, the Alistair Monarch. But they had never finished it. The project was shelved when the company's finances began to crumble. Only 2 prototype engine blocks were ever cast, and only 1 full set of components was ever machined. What about it? Elias asked, his voice carefully neutral. They're scrapping it, Ben said. The whole lot. The warehouse, the jigs, the tooling, the prototypes. They posted a liquidation notice. It's listed as assorted automotive scrap and machinery. They're asking for bids. Elias was silent. He walked over to a large, locked metal cabinet at the back of his garage. He opened it. Inside, protected from dust and moisture, were his personal copies of the Ethelred schematics. Thousands of pages of meticulous drawings, material specifications, and assembly notes. He had been allowed to take them as a condition of his departure. They were considered worthless, the records of a dead project. Elias. You still there? I'm here, Elias said, his eyes tracing the lines of the crankshaft drawing. He knew every tolerance, every angle. He had designed it to be perfectly balanced, a symphony of controlled violence. What's the bid for? The whole lot. As is, where is? Buyer responsible for removal. They just want it gone. They think it's garbage. Elias closed his eyes. He could see the warehouse in his mind. He knew exactly what was in there. The custom-built line boring machine. The crate with the cryo-treated crankshaft. The 2 magnesium alloy engine blocks, sitting on a pallet, wrapped in oil-impregnated cloth. And the prototype chassis, the only Monarch chassis ever built, sitting under a dusty tarp. It was not garbage. It was the unfulfilled dream of a dozen brilliant minds, a treasure trove of unparalleled engineering. Ben, Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. I need you to set up a shell corporation. A simple LLC. Something untraceable. And I need you to put in a bid for me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Ben let out a low whistle. Elias Vance. You old dog. I knew there was still a fire in there somewhere. How much? Elias looked around his clean, quiet garage. He looked at the drawing Lily had made, the one with the flying car. Offer them $1,000, he said. And have the paperwork ready. I'll handle the removal myself. The transaction was an exercise in corporate condescension. Marcus Thorne was tasked with personally overseeing the disposal, a punishment, he suspected, for having questioned the decision in the first place. He stood at the entrance to the cavernous, dusty warehouse, a clipboard in his hand and a $1,000 check from a company called Orchard Holdings LLC in his pocket. The air was stale with the smell of old oil and decay. A flatbed truck, older but impeccably maintained, pulled up precisely at the appointed time. A man in simple work clothes, flannel shirt, clean jeans, sturdy boots, climbed out. He was of average height and build, with a quiet, watchful demeanor. This was Elias Vance. Orchard Holdings? Marcus asked, his tone clipped and impatient. He had a lunch meeting in the city. Elias nodded. He didn't offer a name. He simply handed Marcus a signed copy of the bill of sale. Marcus gestured vaguely at the vast, dim space behind him. It's all yours. Everything inside. You have 48 hours to clear it out, as per the agreement. "We have a crew scheduled for demolition on Monday." He couldn't help but let a smirk touch his lips. He looked at the man's single, aging truck. "Good luck." Elias didn't respond to the condescension. He didn't seem to notice it. His eyes were already scanning the warehouse, taking in the layout, the position of the heavy machinery, the stacked crates. He was not seeing junk, he was seeing a puzzle, a logistical problem to be solved. He walked past Marcus without another word and into the gloom. For an hour, Marcus watched, bored and irritated, as Elias moved through the warehouse. The men didn't start randomly grabbing things. Instead, he walked the entire perimeter, then methodically moved up and down the aisles, his gaze sweeping over everything. He carried a small flashlight, a tape measure, and a notebook. He occasionally stopped to shine the light on a piece of machinery, or to peer into a crate, making a quiet note. He was assessing, planning. A few of the local scrapyard guys had shown up earlier, kicked a few tires on the prototype chassis, laughed at the weird-looking engine parts, and left. They had seen no value. This man, however, moved with a strange, quiet purpose that unnerved Marcus. He seemed to know exactly what he was looking at. Finally, Elias returned to the entrance. He looked at Marcus. "I'll need to make a few calls," he said. It wasn't a question. Marcus shrugged. "As long as you're out by Sunday evening." Elias pulled out an old, non-smart flip phone and made 3 calls. The conversations were short, almost coded. "It's me. It's all here. Yes, even the boring bar. I need you." The calls were to the other scattered remnants of the Alastair engineering team, a master fabricator running a small metal shop in another state, a machinist who now taught at a community college, and a wiring genius who had been designing home automation systems. To a man, they dropped everything. They were coming. As Marcus finally drove away, eager to get back to his world of clean offices and important lunches, he glanced in his rearview mirror. He saw Elias standing in the vast, dark mouth of the warehouse. The man looked small and insignificant against the backdrop of industrial decay. Marcus shook his head, a small, dismissive smile on his face. He had offloaded a liability for $1,000. He had done his job. Katharina Sterling would be pleased. He had no way of knowing that he had just witnessed the single most costly mistake of his career, and of his boss's. He had just sold a legend for the price of scrap metal. The moment the heavy warehouse door rolled shut, sealing him inside with the ghosts of Project Ethelred, the quiet, unassuming facade Elias presented to the world fell away. He was no longer just a small-town repairman. He was in his element. The air, thick with the dust of a decade, smelled like potential. He walked directly to a large, tarp-covered shape in the center of the floor. His hands, which had been so steady and calm in Marcus's presence, trembled slightly as he gripped the corner of the heavy canvas. He pulled. The tarp was heavy, stiff with age, and resisted with a rasping sound that echoed in the cavernous space. Dust motes danced in the beams of light slanting down from the grimy skylights. As the canvas slid away, it revealed the Alastair Monarch. It was just a bare chassis, a rolling frame with suspension components and a steering rack, but to Elias, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The welds, laid down by a master fabricator, were like overlapping dimes. The geometry of the double wishbone suspension was pure, functional art. It was exactly as he had left it. He moved on, his steps quickening. He went to a pallet stacked high with wooden crates, all stenciled with the project codename, Ethelred. He found the one he was looking for, marked, Crankshaft Assembly Prototype 01. With a pry bar he had brought, he carefully opened the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of straw and cosmoline-soaked paper, was the heart of the engine. A billet crankshaft, machined from a single block of aerospace-grade steel, then cryogenically treated and perfectly balanced. He ran a gloved finger along one of the counterweights. It was flawless. The cost to manufacture this single component had been more than 100 times what he had paid for the entire warehouse. Next, he found the 2 engine blocks. They were cast from a proprietary magnesium-aluminum alloy, making them incredibly light. He tapped one with his knuckle. It rang with a clear, high-pitched tone, a sound that spoke of perfect metallurgy and a void-free casting. This was the raw material of his genius. He had spent 2 years of his life designing this engine, running simulations, arguing with metallurgists, and refining every single detail. Now, it was all here, waiting. By nightfall, the others had arrived. First was David Chen, the machinist, a man whose hands could feel tolerances in the millionths of an inch. Then came Maria Flores, the fabricator, who could weld titanium in her sleep. Finally, there was Sam Jones, the electrical wizard, who saw the world as a flow of electrons. They were older now, grayer, but when they saw what Elias had acquired, the years fell away. There were no grand speeches. Elias simply unrolled a set of his pristine schematics on the hood of the Monarch chassis. "It's all here," he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity they had not heard in a decade. "Everything we need. The jigs, the tooling, the components. We're going to build it. We're going to build 1 inch." A slow grin spread across David's face. "Just one." "We'll start with 1, Elias amended, a ghost of a smile on his own face. They worked with a silent, synchronized efficiency that was breathtaking to behold. This was not a team that needed managers or meetings. They were a single organism, each a vital organ, with Elias as the brain. The first task was triage and organization. They spent 2 days doing nothing but cleaning, sorting, and inventorying. Every nut, bolt, and washer was identified, checked against the schematics, cleaned, and placed in a labeled bin. The larger components, the engine blocks, the cylinder heads, the transmission housing, were painstakingly cleaned and inspected for any degradation. The warehouse, a tomb of forgotten ambition, was transformed. They set up temporary lighting, ran new power lines for the machines, and established clean zones for assembly. Maria set to work on the Monarch chassis, stripping it down to the bare frame, checking every weld, and preparing it for powder coating. David and Elias focused on the heart, the V12. The process was methodical, almost ritualistic. They didn't just assemble the engine, they blueprinted it. Every single component was measured, weighed, and checked against the original specifications. The cylinder bores were honed to a perfect finish, the deck of the block was checked for flatness to within 0.010 of an inch. Elias found a minor casting flaw in one of the cylinder heads, a tiny pocket of porosity that would have been invisible to anyone else. It would have held up under normal conditions, but under the stress he had designed the engine for, it would have eventually failed. "We can't use this one," David said, his face grim. "We only have the one spare." Elias studied the flaw under a portable microscope. He was silent for a long time. Then he went to a crate of specialized Alistair tools and pulled out a small, intricate device. It was a pin welder he had designed for just such a contingency. He spent the next 4 hours meticulously drilling out the flaw and filling it, molecule by molecule, with parent metal. When he was done, he rescanned the area. The repair was undetectable. It was as if the flaw had never existed. The only part they couldn't find was a small, custom-designed oil scavenge pump bracket. It was a simple piece, but its shape was unique to the Ethelred's dry sump lubrication system. A search of the inventory and all the crates turned up nothing. It must have been on a different pallet, or perhaps it was never fabricated. "We can't go on without it," Sam said, looking at the gaping hole in the side of the engine block where the pump was supposed to mount. Elias simply nodded. He went to his truck and returned with a block of aluminum, a set of calipers, and a hacksaw. He spent the next 2 days in a corner of the warehouse, with a drill press and a set of files. He didn't use a CNC machine or a 3D printer. He made the bracket by hand, working from the dimensions in his head and the feel of the files in his hands. The final piece was a perfect, jewel-like object, a testament to pure skill. The raw block of aluminum had cost him $73 at a local supplier. It was the only money he had to spend on the engine itself. Slowly, methodically, the engine came together. The polished crankshaft was lowered into the block. The pistons, with their custom-machined crowns, were fitted to the rods and slipped into the cylinders. The twin cylinder heads, each a marvel of intake and exhaust port design, were torqued down. The impossibly complex timing chain system was installed and calibrated. It was a symphony of metal, a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle where every piece had to fit perfectly. Finally, the day came. The completed engine, a masterpiece of raw aluminum and quiet menace, hung from a chain hoist. It was beautiful, a piece of industrial sculpture. Maria had finished the chassis, now gleaming in a coat of deep, dark British racing green. Working together, they lowered the V12 into the Monarch's engine bay. It settled onto its mounts with a soft click, a perfect fit. Sam spent the next week building the wiring harness from scratch, a process more akin to weaving a tapestry than electrical work. Every wire was cut to the perfect length, every connector hand-crimped and sealed. At last, it was time. The car sat in the center of the now organized warehouse, fuel and oil lines connected, a temporary battery hooked up. The four of them stood around it, their faces grimy, their bodies tired, but their eyes bright with anticipation. There was no fanfare. Elias simply slid into the bare driver's seat, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The starter whirred for a split second, and then the Ethelred V12 coughed into life. It wasn't a roar, not yet. It was a low, menacing burble, a deep, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the concrete floor. It sounded alive. Elias let it idle for a minute, his eyes scanning the temporary gauges he had rigged up. Oil pressure, steady. Water temperature, climbing slowly. Everything was perfect. He gave the throttle a gentle blip. The engine responded instantly, a sharp, crisp bark that echoed through the warehouse, a sound of pure, unadulterated mechanical fury. It was the sound of vindication. It was the sound of a legend being born, or rather, reborn. The first victory was not a public spectacle. It was a quiet transaction, conducted with the gravity of a papal conclave. The rumor started on a highly exclusive, password-protected forum for collectors of significant automobiles. It was just a whisper at first, someone had resurrected an Ethelred V12. Not a replica, but one of the original prototype engines. And it was running. The whisper reached the ears of a man named Julian Croft. Croft was not a new-money billionaire who bought the latest hypercar to display at galas. He was an industrialist of old wealth, a man whose family had been building turbines for generations. He understood metal, and he understood genius. He had owned 2 Alastair cars in his youth and had mourned the company's passing. He made a few discreet inquiries through his network. The trail led, surprisingly, to a shell company called Orchard Holdings, and a recently cleared-out warehouse in an industrial park. Croft did not send an underling. He flew his private jet to the small municipal airport nearby and had his driver take him to the warehouse in a nondescript sedan. When he arrived, he found the large bay door open. The scene inside was not what he expected. It was not a high-tech laboratory, but a clean, functional workshop. And in the center of it, gleaming under the work lights, was the Monarch. Elias, alerted to his arrival by a call from the security guard at the industrial park gate whom he had befriended, met him at the door. He was wiping his hands on a clean rag. "Mr. Vance?" Croft asked, extending a hand. His handshake was firm, the grip of a man used to building things. "Yes," Elias said, simply. He did not seem impressed by Croft's tailored suit or his air of quiet authority. "I was told you might have something to show me," Croft said, his eyes already fixed on the car. Elias nodded and gestured for him to enter. He didn't offer a sales pitch. He didn't need to. The car spoke for itself. Croft walked around it slowly, his expert eye taking in every detail. He ran his hand over the fender, a look of deep appreciation on his face. He peered into the engine bay, his breath catching audibly at the sight of the V12. He saw not just an engine, but a statement of purpose. He recognized the hand-fabricated bracket immediately for what it was, a signature of craftsmanship. "Start it," Croft said, his voice a low command. Elias got into the car and turned the key. The engine fired instantly, settling into that same, perfect, menacing idle. Croft closed his eyes, listening. He was listening to the sound of perfect combustion, of zero-tolerance assembly, of a master's touch. "I'll give you $3 million for it," Croft said, opening his eyes. He pointed at the car. "As it sits." Elias was silent for a moment. David, Maria, and Sam, who had been watching from the back of the workshop, held their breath. This was more money than any of them had seen in their lives. "No," Elias said. A flicker of surprise crossed Croft's face. $5 million, then. "That's my final offer for the car." "The car is not for sale," Elias said calmly. "This is prototype 0. It stays with me. It's the master copy." He paused, then continued, his voice even. "But the design is for sale. I will build you Monarch number 1. It will be identical to this one, but with a finished interior and your choice of color. And then I will build 2 more. After that, the jigs will be destroyed. There will only ever be 4 monarchs in the world, including this 1-inch. Croft stared at Elias, a slow smile spreading across his face. This was not a mechanic. This was a peer. This was a man who understood the value of his own creation, who understood scarcity and legacy. And the price for Monarch number 1? Croft asked. $10 million, Elias said, without blinking. 50% up front, to capitalize the new company. The rest on delivery. The deal was struck right there, on the hood of the prototype, with a handshake. Ben Carter, summoned from his office, arrived an hour later with a hastily drafted but ironclad contract. The wire transfer for $5 million from Croft's Swiss bank account arrived in the newly formed Vance Automotive LLC business account before the sun set. Elias paid his team a salary that was double their previous highest earnings and made them all partners in the new venture. He bought the warehouse and the surrounding land outright from the city for cash. He ordered new, state-of-the-art machinery. But the core of the operation remained the same, 4 brilliant, dedicated people in a clean workshop, building something extraordinary. The first major success hadn't been loud. It had been a quiet, decisive confirmation of everything Elias knew to be true, that true value is not what is written on a balance sheet, but what is built with skill, passion, and uncompromising integrity. The news reached Katharina Sterling not through a formal report, but in the most galling way imaginable, through a lifestyle magazine. She was in her doctor's private waiting room, a place of hushed tones and expensive art, flipping through a glossy publication called The Croft Quarterly, a vanity magazine sent to Julian Croft's friends and clients. And there it was. A 12-page spread. The resurrection of a legend, Julian Croft commissions the Alastair Monarch. The photos were stunning. They showed the deep green prototype, the gleaming V12 engine, and a series of artfully shot black and white photos of the team at work. The article waxed poetic about a lost masterpiece of automotive engineering, a legendary V12 engine brought back from the dead by a reclusive genius and his small, dedicated team. It mentioned the price tag, $10 million per car, with a limited run of only 3 customer vehicles. It named the company, Vance Automotive. And it named the genius, Elias Vance. Katharina stared at the name. Vance. The name was vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. She read the article again, her mind racing. It mentioned the engine was built from an original prototype, one of only 2 ever cast, salvaged from a forgotten warehouse. A cold dread began to creep up her spine. She pulled out her phone and sent a single, terse message to her assistant. Marcus. My office. Now. Marcus Thorne was reviewing quarterly asset disposal reports when the summons came. He arrived at Katharina's penthouse office to find her standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city, the magazine clutched in her hand like a weapon. She didn't turn when he entered. Project Ethelred, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Marcus's blood ran cold. Mr. Sterling. The warehouse in Northwood. The scrap metal we liquidated last quarter. Who bought it? Marcus's mind went into overdrive. He was good at his job. He remembered everything. A shell company, Mr. Sterling. Orchard Holdings LLC. They paid $1,000. And who was the principal of Orchard Holdings? She pressed, finally turning to face him. Her eyes were chips of ice. I don't know, it was a blind LLC set up by a law firm. The man who handled the removal. I don't remember his name. He was just a local guy, a mechanic or something. Katharina threw the magazine onto her massive desk. It landed open on the main photo spread. Look, she commanded. Marcus walked over and looked down at the photo. It was a close-up of a man's hands, carefully adjusting a component on the V12 engine. The hands were clean but calloused, the hands of someone who worked with tools. And then he saw the man's face in a smaller photo, a candid shot of him looking at the finished car, a look of quiet pride on his face. It was the same man. The quiet, unassuming man from the warehouse. Elias Vance. That's him, Marcus whispered, a wave of nausea washing over him. That's the man who bought the scrap. Katharina let out a sound that was half laugh, half snarl. Scrap, she hissed. We had a $30 million business sitting in a dusty warehouse, and we gave it away for $1,000. Because I listened to a mid-level acquisitions manager who told me it was junk. She pointed a finger at Marcus. Find that manager. His name was Peterson, or Patterson. The one who wrote the original asset report. I want him gone. Not transferred. Gone. Escort him out of the building. And get our legal team on the line. I want to know if we can claw this back. Fraud. Misrepresentation. Something. The acquisitions manager, a sycophantic man named Peterson who had assured Katharina the warehouse contained nothing but rust, was fired so quickly his security badge was deactivated while he was on his lunch break. The legal team's verdict, however, was not what Katharina wanted to hear. It was delivered by the firm's senior counsel, a man who was not intimidated by her. The sale was clean, Katharina, he said bluntly over the speakerphone. As is, where is? The bill of sale is ironclad. We warranted nothing. We defined the assets as scrap and obsolete prototypes. He bought exactly what we offered. There was no fraud. The only thing that was misrepresented was our own assessment of the asset's value. That's not a legal issue, that's an operational failure. A colossal 1-inch. Katharina slammed the phone down. She paced her office like a caged panther. It wasn't just the money. It was the humiliation. It was the fact that some no-name mechanic in a flannel shirt had so completely and utterly outmaneuvered her. He had used her own system, her own obsession with bottom-line efficiency, against her. He had seen value where she had only seen a liability. It was an insult to her entire worldview. Fine, she said to Marcus, who was standing by the door, trying to look invisible. If I can't sue him, I'll buy him. Everyone has a price. This. Vance, he's running a small-time operation. He's got one rich client. He can't handle real production. We can. Sterling Equity will acquire Vance Automotive. We'll provide the capital, the manufacturing expertise. He can stay on as a consultant. Head of design. Whatever. Find out where he is. I'm going to pay him a visit. The confrontation, when it came, was on Elias's terms. Katharina Sterling did not arrive in her chauffeured sedan. The roads leading to the newly christened Vance Automotive were unpaved, and her driver refused to take the expensive car down them. She was forced to arrive in a black SUV, which now sat, coated in a fine layer of dust, looking conspicuously out of place next to the battered pickup trucks of the construction crew expanding the workshop. She stepped out, dressed in a severe, dark pantsuit and impossibly sharp heels that immediately sank into the gravel driveway. She looked around in disgust. This was where a $30 million enterprise was being born. It was primitive. Elias met her at the door of the main workshop. He was wearing his usual work clothes, and he held a clean rag in his hand. He was not surprised to see her. Ben had warned him she might try something like this. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice dripping with forced cordiality. Katharina Sterling. I believe you've acquired some property that once belonged to my company. I purchased it, Elias corrected her quietly. For the agreed-upon price. He led her into the workshop. The space had been transformed. Where there was once dust and decay, there was now order and purpose. The Monarch prototype sat in one corner, a silent green sentinel. In the main assembly bay, the chassis for Monarch No. 1 was already laid out on a jig. New machinery, still gleaming, lined the walls. The air smelled of clean oil, metal, and progress. Katharina's carefully constructed composure began to crack. This was not the ramshackle operation she had imagined. This was a serious, professional workshop, funded by her own short-sightedness. Impressive, she said, the word sounding like an insult. You've done a lot with our leftovers. Elias didn't rise to the bait. He simply waited. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant whine of a welder from the new extension. The power dynamic she was so used to controlling was absent here. He held all the cards. He had the skill, the asset, and the capital. All she had was the memory of a colossal mistake. Let's be direct, Mr. Vance, she said, abandoning any pretense of friendliness. You have a boutique operation here. A curiosity. You can build one car, maybe two. But you can't scale. I can. Sterling Equity has manufacturing partnerships, global distribution, a marketing machine. I am here to offer you a way to turn this hobby into a real business. I am prepared to acquire a majority stake in Vance Automotive. Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable. You don't want to build cars, Mr. Sterling. You want to build a brand. You would put my engine in an SUV, license the name to a watchmaker, and dilute the value of the very thing you think you're buying. You see this as an asset to be leveraged. I see it as a responsibility. Her face hardened. That's a very naive way to look at it. This is business. No, Elias said, his voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel. This is my life's work. It is not for sale. Everything is for sale, she shot back. Name your price. For the whole company. 10 million. 20. 30. Elias was silent for a long moment. He looked past her, toward the back of the shop, where a small, clean desk had been set up. Lily was there, sitting quietly, doing her homework. She had a school holiday, and he had brought her to the workshop. She was carefully coloring in a drawing. It was a picture of the green monarch, with wings. He turned his gaze back to Katharina. You don't have enough money to buy this, he said. And in his quiet, simple statement, Katharina Sterling finally, truly understood. He was not talking about dollars. He was talking about value. He was operating on a level she couldn't comprehend, in a currency she didn't possess. She had come here to re-establish her dominance, to put the mechanic back in his place. Instead, she had been dismissed. Not angrily, not emotionally, but with the calm, final certainty of a master craftsman setting aside a flawed tool. She had lost. The victory was not marked by a parade, but by the quiet hum of a thriving business. Vance Automotive did not become a global behemoth. It became something far better, a sustainable, profitable, and deeply respected institution. Elias accepted Julian Croft's offer not for a partnership, but for a long-term service and development contract. The $5 million in seed money was paid back within 2 years. Monarch No. 1 was delivered to Croft a year later, a perfect machine of deep blue metal and tan leather. It won Best in Show at the most prestigious concours d'elegance in the world, its V12 engine idling on the lawn like a purring tiger among peacocks. Monarch No. 2, finished in silver, went to a technology billionaire in Japan. Monarch No. 3, in a stunning black, was purchased by a secretive European royal. As promised, after the third car was delivered, Elias and his team publicly destroyed the primary chassis jigs and the engine casting molds. The value of the 4 existing Monarchs, including Elias's own prototype, skyrocketed overnight. Katharina Sterling did not fall into ruin. The world of high finance is rarely so just. But the story of the Ethelred V12 became a quiet legend in boardrooms and on trading floors, a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris. It was a permanent stain on her reputation for infallible judgment. Her next few deals were overly cautious, and she missed a major market upswing. Her star, once blindingly bright, began a slow, inexorable dimming. Marcus Thorne, her competent assistant, finally found the courage to leave, taking a position with one of Croft's companies, where his eye for detail was appreciated as a skill rather than a tool for damage control. The most significant change at Vance Automotive was a simple, symbolic one. One morning, a new sign was installed over the entrance to the expanded workshop. It was not a flashy neon logo. It was a single piece of brushed steel, with one word laser cut into it, Vance. It was understated, elegant, and permanent. It was a statement of fact, not an advertisement. The narrative of success had been written, not by a marketing team, but by the quiet, methodical application of skill. Elias Vance had not set out to defeat Katharina Sterling. He had simply set out to build the car he was always meant to build. Her defeat was merely a byproduct of his success, a footnote in the story of his quiet triumph. He remained unchanged by the money and the accolades. His core values, patience, precision, and family, were the bedrock upon which his new empire was built. The story concluded not in a boardroom or at a gala, but on a quiet Tuesday evening in the workshop. The last of the workers had gone home. The vast space was silent, save for the gentle hum of the ventilation system. The air was clean. Elias was at his original workbench, carefully reassembling the antique clock for his neighbor, the one with the tiny brass gear. The job was almost finished. Lily sat at her own small workbench next to his, a scaled-down version of her father's. She wasn't coloring tonight. She was carefully assembling a complex model car kit, a gift from Julian Croft. Her small hands moved with a familiar, inherited precision, fitting a tiny plastic engine piece into place. "Daddy," she said, not looking up from her work. "Is our car the best car in the world?" Elias looked at his daughter, then at the silent, powerful shape of the Monarch prototype sleeping in the corner of the shop he now owned. He thought of Katharina Sterling in her world of disposable assets and fleeting numbers. He thought of the 17 patents, the years of quiet obscurity, and the $73 piece of aluminum that had been the key to it all. "It's a good car, Bug," he said, his voice soft in the quiet workshop. "It's built the right way. And we built it together." That, he knew, was the only metric that had ever truly mattered. He had achieved immense success, but he had not become the thing he defeated. He was still the quiet master, at peace in his sanctuary, his victory measured not in dollars, but in the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, and the presence of his daughter by his side.